final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 8795 in the name of Angus-MacDonald on the National Tree for Scotland. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I'd invite those members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. I now call on Angus-MacDonald to open the debate. Mr MacDonald, you have 7 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I hope the Chamber will bear with me. I'm suffering from a cold at the moment, so as I say, hopefully you can bear with me. As the naturalist Richard Mabey once wrote, to be without trees would, in the most literal way, to be without our roots. I'm extremely pleased to bring this debate to the Chamber, welcoming the Scots-pine, or Pinus sylvestris, as the designated national tree of Scotland. I'd like to thank all the members who have stayed behind and signed my motion, and remind those that have stayed behind for this debate that Forestry-Commission Scotland have a reception in the garden lobby this evening, which I am hosting and which the Minister will be addressing. I first encountered the idea of a national tree for Scotland in my role as a member of the Public Petitions Committee. A member of the public, Alex Hamilton, who I believe is in the public gallery this evening, lodged a petition in November 2012 calling on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government, as a symbolic commitment to our woodlands and natural heritage, to proclaim the Scots-pine as the national tree of Scotland. The campaign was endorsed by, among others, the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the John Muir Trust. The committee considered the petition at the beginning of 2013 and sought the views of the Forestry-Commission Scotland and Scottish Natural Heritage. And as a result, Mr Hamilton was successful in gaining the support of the committee, and my colleague Joan McAlpine brought the subject of a national tree to a Chamber debate in April. On the back of the petition and following the members' debate, the Minister for Environment and Climate Change instructed Forestry-Commission Scotland to undertake a public consultation, which they ran from September to December. The consultation came back overwhelmingly in favour of a national tree of Scotland, and that the tree should be the Scots-pine. And I believe the Scots-pine is an excellent choice for the national tree of Scotland, although some did argue that the rowan tree should also be a contender. The Scots-pine, however, is an iconic and easily recognisable tree with a distinctive head of evergreen foliage, and part of its suitability as the national tree of Scotland is undoubtedly the fact that there are around 130,000 hectares of Scots-pine in Scotland, and that is the most widely distributed conifer in the world, with a natural range that stretches from western Scotland to eastern Siberia and from the north of the Arctic Circle in Scandinavia to southern Spain. The tree also has strong links with the history and culture of Scotland. It's a native species that is referred to in Gaelic culture and made up part of the ancient Caledonian forest. The Scots-pine also found favour during the Scottish Enlightenment period, which saw significant new plantings by country estates. And while it is important to note the suitability of the Scots-pine as a symbol, we must not overlook the practical benefits. Designating the Scots-pine as a national tree of Scotland may hopefully result in greater numbers being planted, which of course would be extremely welcome. The timber of the Scots-pine combines good strength with light weight. It's easy to work with and takes fixings well. So it's an excellent and sustainable material for construction and suitable for interior and exterior joinery. This symbolic designation has practical benefits for conservation as well. The Scots-pine is an essential part of the rural environment that is home to some of Scotland's best known and treasured creatures such as the capercaillie, pine marten, red squirrel and wildcat. Above and beyond the suitability of the Scots-pine, the designation of a national tree for Scotland is an important step forward in confirming this Parliament's commitment to restoring and improving the condition of native woodland. The loss of woodland and associated open habitats is the loss of a fantastic natural resource, and I am sure we all agree that we must support and promote this designation to foster the management and regeneration of existing pine woods and also to encourage the development of urban woodland. And of course, our national tree will now join the lion rampant, the saltire and the thistle as emblems of our country. And of course, as recently as yesterday, the Public Petitions Committee discussed a petition lodged by the RSPB calling on the golden eagle to be named as Scotland's national bird. and the committee awaits what will hopefully be a positive response from the Scottish Government in due course. In closing, Presiding Officer, I would encourage all my fellow MSPs to add their support to the designation of the Scots-pine as a national tree of Scotland. It is clear that climate change is a serious issue that will give us many challenges in years to come, and through initiatives like this one, Scotland can lead the way in reforestation, which will ultimately help mitigate the effects of climate change, as well as providing a sustainable supply of high-quality timber. I look forward to both the Scottish Parliament's and the Scottish Government's continued support for this initiative, including formal designation in the coming months. And once again, thank Alex Hamilton for bringing the need for a designated national tree to the Parliament's attention. Otherwise, we would not be at the stage that we are today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
And thank you. I now call on Patricia Ferguson to be followed by Joan McAlpine. 4 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I very much welcome this debate and congratulate Angus-MacDonald on securing the debate this evening, and of course welcome the fact that the Scots-pine has now been designated as the national tree of Scotland. And I think it is fitting that it was done in such a way that the public were able to have their say, and the fact that there was competition is, in my view, no bad thing. But symbols are important. Indeed, I stand to speak today proudly wearing a red rose, the symbol of international socialism. And the idea of having that kind of symbol is one that most people will recognise. It helps to mark one from another. It helps to give people a sense of identity. And of course, the idea of a national tree came, as we've heard from Angus-MacDonald, from a public petition with a suggestion that we should adopt a national tree and that it should be the Scots-pine. And Alex Hamilton, my constituent, is to be warmly congratulated on the idea, but also on his prescience in correctly identifying that the Scots-pine should be the one that comes out on top. And the fact that we have now identified the Scots-pine as the tree that is to be identified with Scotland is, in my view, absolutely correct. The round tree is, of course, a very beautiful tree with its own individual attributes that make it one that was worthy of consideration. But to me, the pine is the one that best symbolises Scotland and is most recognisable as being attached to and part of Scotland and its world, or the world's view of our country. And of course, as we've heard from Angus-MacDonald, the Scots-pine is wide of reach. I think this was discussed in Joan McAlpine's interesting debate previously, stretching almost around the world, and is known in many countries and welcomed and encouraged in many countries. But of course, it also bears the name of our country, which is particularly important too. And it is a most utilitarian tree. As we've heard, it's very useful not just for building, but also for enhancing buildings and for making products that are useful to our economy, but also for allowing the materials to be easily worked, because it is a tree that people enjoy using. We've also heard from Angus-MacDonald that this will be an important contribution to the biodiversity of our country, and again that was something that was touched on in the previous debate, and I think that that is an element of the Scots-pine that must be developed and encouraged, as too should its contribution to the reforestation of parts of our country, something that I think would be a very useful part of our drive towards mitigating the effects of climate change. But I would want to make one other point this evening, Presiding Officer, and that is that I think having the designation of the tree is of course a good and wonderful thing, but we need to go further. We need to begin to educate young people in our country about the importance of the Scots-pine and use that as a way of educating them about the importance of our other national plants and our other national animals, and about biodiversity and about our ecosystems too. I've gone from school to school, as I'm sure other members have, looking at the work that schools are doing to obtain their green flag. I think that's a wonderful scheme. And the enthusiasm of those young people is always taken home to their parents, and it encourages them to become more aware of their environment too. So the educational offer, or the educational facility that the Scots-pine could be, is one that I think we should remember. In closing, Presiding Officer, I would want to congratulate again Angus-MacDonald for securing the debate, John McAlpine for the debate we had previously, which I think helped very much in stimulating interest in the competition run by the Forestry-Commission. Of course, congratulate the Forestry-Commission on the work they do, and everyone who took part in deciding that the Scots-pine should receive the designation. But of course, I would want to reserve particular congratulations to Alec Hamilton. Without him, we wouldn't be having this debate, and we wouldn't have a national tree.
Excellent. Many, many thanks. Now call on Joan McAlpine to be followed by Jamie McGregor.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I too congratulate Angus-MacDonald on securing this debate on a subject close to my heart, and can I also, before I begin, Presiding Officer, apologise that I'll have to leave the debate early, so to apologise to yourself, fellow members, and to the Minister. I'm absolutely delighted, of course, with today's announcement, not just because I held the members' debate last year, asking the government to consult on the national tree. But I was also pleased that so many people responded to the government's consultation, 4,500, I understand, and I know that the government went out of its way to reach as many groups as possible, including children, in the consultation, and I think that was a great thing. And so the consultation itself helped to raise awareness. I'd like to thank the Minister for copying me into the letter to David Stewart, convener of the Public Petitions Committee, who, as has already been said, has raised this issue in response to Alex Hamilton's petition. And I would like other members, to take the opportunity to congratulate Mr Hamilton on the success of his campaign, and also to congratulate the organisations that supported him, such as the Scottish Woodland Trust, Borders Forest Trust, Trees for Life, RSPB, the Scottish Wildlife Trust, the John Muir Trust, and probably lots of others that I haven't mentioned. Presiding Officer, after the last ice age, pine wood covered up to 1.7 million hectares of Scotland, but by 2000 only 18,000 hectares remained of that forest. So the Scots-pine is our only native conifer, and it has a special place in our hearts, our history, landscape culture and the economy. It has inspired many poets, Angus MacNicol, Sheena Blackhall, William Hershaw and Robin Fulton Mackenzie. All, for example, have been inspired to verse by the Scots-pine, and members who are interested can enjoy their work in the Anthology of Tree Poems Into the Forest, edited by Mandy Haggith, and published last year. Jackie Kay, a poet I greatly admire, compared her Highland grandmother to a Scots-pine and called her tall, straight-backed, proud and plentiful, which I think is a beautiful description and underlines why this is such a wonderful addition to a range of national symbols such as tartan, thistles and lion ramparts, as has already been outlined. It lived for up to 600 years. Its sap was prized in boat building, and it plays a vital part in our maritime history and shipbuilding tradition, and it's known as a tree of heroes. It also symbolises immortality. And putting that romance and history aside, the announcement today, as other members have said, is great news for the environment, because the Scots pine and pine forests generally provide home to species such as the capercaillie, the Scottish crossbill, pine marten and red squirrel. So the biodiversity that previous members have talked about is encouraged by the planting of more trees such as the Scots pine. I commend the government's ambition with regard to increasing the forest cover of Scotland from 18% to 25% by 2050. And I believe that this announcement will help with that ambition. I would also like to mention the role played by woodlands in enhancing our sense of well-being. The Social and Economic Research Group at Forest Research found that woodland enhanced our physical as well as our mental health, and of course it encourages outdoor activities such as the Galloway Forest Park, the largest in Britain, in my own region, which contains a variety of tourist attractions such as the Barn Owl Haven and the Red Kite Trail. In addition to that, of course, forestry itself employs a great many people. It's a very important part of our economy. And in the South of Scotland region alone, it supports 2,000 jobs. So for all these reasons, I think this announcement today is fantastic. I'd like to end very quickly on a A slightly note of concern in that the Scots-pine is threatened by a number of tree diseases, and the Scottish Woodlands Trust have given us a briefing on that today. They've said that the Scottish Rural Development Programme includes a new category of woodland support for tree help and will support woodland owners who have lost 30% of their wood to various diseases and allow them to restock. But they mentioned that the tight cat settlement for Scotland that we've been discussing today could threaten this, and have asked how this is likely to be funded going forward, and anything that the Minister could share with the House on that regard, I'm sure would be very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. Now call on Jamie McGregor to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I too congratulate Angus-MacDonald on securing today's debate, and I'm pleased to welcome the news that the Scots-pine, or Pinus sylvestris, is to be Scotland's national tree. I understand that in previous centuries this species was normally known as the Scots fir, but we all know it as the Scots pine today. As a MacGregor, I would also want to point out that the Scots pine tree is the plant badge of the Clan Gregor, and when the wearing of tartan was outlawed after the 1745 Jacobite rebellion, Gregor clansmen wore their clan's plant badge as an act of defiance and identification, more perhaps to protest the loss of their name, which had been taken away in the early 1600s, not by a Westminster Parliament, but by a Scottish one, and the clan is still awaiting an apology for that. Like other members today, I acknowledge the efforts of those in Scotland who have campaigned for us to have a national tree, and thank the Forestry-Commission for carrying out a public consultation. As Highlands and Islands MSP, I'm delighted that the Scots pine has been chosen, as this iconic and instantly recognisable Scottish tree is a key part of the biodiversity of my region, which of course contains the vast majority of the remaining Caledonian forest, notably in Abernethy, Glenafric and Rothiemurchus. This habitat sustains some of the most important plant, animal and bird species, including wildcats, capercaillie, black game and the Scottish crossbill. The capercaillie, the huge aged granny trees are especially important. Patricia Ferguson is absolutely right to stress the importance of these trees, but the granny trees particularly is important to the capercaillie, and for this reason they should never be cut down. The decline in capercaillie, and for that matter black game, in areas where they were once prolific, must be a great cause for concern to SNH and the RSPB. And as its species champion, I would also highlight that the pine forests provide a home for the very rare narrow-headed ant. Now, it's estimated that around 17,000 hectares of Scots pine forest remains, compared to the 1.5 million hectares which existed 6,000 years ago. My region also hosts the oldest Scots pine ever scientifically dated in Scotland, in Glenloyne in Venetia, which was estimated to be about 550 years old in the late 1990s by scientists from the Forestry-Commission's Forest Research Agency. However, Scots pines have been dated at over 700 years old in both Sweden and Norway. And the motion refers to our commitments to woodlands, biodiversity and reforestation, and I support all of that. The harvesting of forestry and replanting of trees remains a very important industry in my region, sustaining many jobs in rural communities, as is tourism and ecotourism. Now, there's been concern in the Scottish timber industry that not enough trees are being planted to ensure a sustainable industry in the future. I mentioned this, along with others, at a recent Rural Affairs Committee meeting. And I'm keen to see the planting of a diverse range of trees in Scotland, including our native species. Though huge plantations of Sitka spruce may be commercial, they're certainly not that bonny to look at, or that good for wildlife, because they canopy, allowing not enough light to penetrate, and therefore they produce a denuded forest floor, whereas a grove of Scots pine makes a grand sight and also has an accessible forest floor much richer in other plants and therefore a far superior habitat for wildlife of all sorts. You've only got to look at Loch Tulla and at the top of Loch Lomond to see how beautiful these Scots pine trees are. And I will conclude by expressing the hope that the decision to have a national tree and for that tree to be the Scots pine will increase awareness and understanding of Scotland's trees and forests and the vital part that they play as part of our heritage, our culture, our economy and our natural environment. Thanks.
Many thanks. Now Colin Stewart-Stevenson, after which we'll move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It's not often that my spouse participates in and seeks to influence parliamentary business, but today I received an urgent email from Sandra with her vote on the national tree, and I'm delighted to say that she said number 1, Scots pine. But she then went on and suggested number 2 for her was silver birch, and number 3 was the rowan. Now, this may tell you a little bit about my wife, of course, because silver birch she is quite close to, because Care No More, one of our local vine-based wineries, produces a wonderful silver birch wine, which is lightly petulant and reminiscent of the finest French fizzy wine, if you've got a vivid imagination. And of course the rowans, of which we have 6 at the bottom of the garden, are the traditional Scots guard against the witches coming in. So I perfectly understand why she had them on the list, but delighted that she was able, from afar, by email, to support tonight's motion. Jamie McGregor compared, of course, the Scots pine to the Sitka spruce. I must say, where I live in Banffshire, I'm surrounded on 3 sides by Sitka spruce, and it is almost a biodiversity no-go zone, because the forest floor is just so impacted by the lack of sunlight. We do have badgers come through it, we do have deer come through it, there is a fox lives in it, but comparatively in plant life terms there's not very much. The Scots pine, by contrast, encourages huge diversity. Among the diversity, of course, that we have associated with it, and perhaps it's no accident, is Felis sylvestris grampia. In other words, the Scots wildcat, using that word sylvestris, meaning the forest, as an important part of that. And of course, I was slightly surprised that Jamie, in referring to the wildcat, didn't, of course, remind us of the McGregor clan motto, which is touch not the cat, but with a glove, which is a good thing to say about the Scots wildcat. But of course, there are lots of other species that have sylvestris in their title as well, besides Pinus sylvestris, the Scots pine. There's Anthricus sylvestris, which is cow parsley, which can be found on the margins of our woodland. There's Malva sylvestris, the common mallow, which again, not in Scotland perhaps, but elsewhere is in the margins of forests. Malus sylvestris, the European crab apple, which of course is itself a tree. Angelica sylvestris, which is wild angelica that lives in forest margins. Anemone sylvestris, the snowdrop anemone, but that doesn't live really much in forests. And perhaps finally Thymelicus sylvestris, which is a small skipper butterfly, but alas, that latter one is not present in Scotland at all. So diversity comes in many forms across the environment that we have in Europe. And of course, the Scots pine is one I'd love to have in my garden, but growing as it does to 35 or 40 metres, I think that's a remote chance. I'm told that in parts of Scandinavia it can exceed 50 metres. So a very substantial tree indeed that lives for hundreds of years. And I'm absolutely delighted that we have not perhaps followed Canada in actually putting the output of a tree, the maple leaf, as the main motif on their flag, but having a national tree in Scotland and having it as the Scots pine is something which I very much welcome indeed. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. A vintage performance. Now call on the Minister to close the debate on behalf of the Government, please. Mr Wheelhouse, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by thanking Angus-MacDonald for bringing this motion to the Chamber, and can I share his enthusiasm for the designation of a national tree for Scotland. And I am most grateful to members for their valuable contributions during this afternoon's debate, and I think it should be only right to acknowledge Mr Hamilton's contribution to bringing the petition to the Parliament in getting us to this point, as members have identified. It's a shame that Joan McAlpine has unfortunately had to leave. I would just want to thank her also for raising her previous Members' Business motion, which helped influence the debate. That motion invited us to recognise the significance of the Year of Natural Scotland, and also to create a legacy that would include the declaration of an official national tree after due public consultation. In closing that debate, I raised 3 questions. First, what is a national tree for? Secondly, what does it mean if we decide to adopt a national tree? And thirdly, what process should we go through? And if I can address this last one first. Members may recall that at the time there were a number of online votes being run by, amongst others, the Woodland Trust Scotland and Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh to identify Scotland's favourite trees, flora and fauna. As these were a vote rather than a formal consultation endorsed by government, I asked Forestry-Commission Scotland to set up a formal consultation. And that asked 2 fundamental questions. Firstly, should there be a national tree for Scotland, yes or no? And if so, we asked secondly, what species would the respondents like? After a 3-month consultation that started on the 3rd of October and concluded on the 3rd of December, we had, as Angus-McDonald identified, over 4,500 responses. In response to the first question as to whether there should be a national tree for Scotland, there was an overwhelming yes, with 95% of everyone asked supporting the concept. And given that endorsement, the People's choice was the Scots-pine, with over 52% choosing this majestic tree as a clear winner. For the record, and for the benefit of Sandra Stevenson, the second was the rowan, and third was holly. Both very attractive trees in their own right, and I can quite understand why Sandra has chosen the rowan as one of hers. Going back to those original 3 questions, I did pose in May, what is a national tree for? And at its simplest, consultee stated a national tree is a clear symbol of our affinity with Scotland's trees, woods and forests, and their importance to us all. In regards to my second question on what it means if we decide to adopt a national tree, I can say the following. It means we have a clear symbol, similar to the renowned Scots thistle, chosen for and by the people of Scotland, and a legacy for generations to come. I remember with some affection the launch of the consultation at the Botanics here in Edinburgh. We had poets, artists and a group of school children from Stockbridge Primary School bringing in an energy, passion and enthusiasm to the proceedings that demonstrated the vision and longevity of this designation and the potential to use such an exercise, I think, as Patricia Ferguson rightly identified, to help promote and connect people with our environment. And a national tree is a symbol that can be used for the promotion and marketing of Scotland and our magnificent environment, and especially our trees, woods and forests, which, let us not forget, cover 18% of Scotland's land, or some 1.4 million hectares, and this represents 45% of the total forest resources across the UK. A formal designation of the National Tree of Scotland will take place in the coming months as part of the events to mark the Year of Natural Scotland and to give all members an opportunity to have their say on that. So why is Scots-pine such a great choice? Well, I guess the name has a lot to do with it for many people, but Scots-pine has a lot to offer, as a number of members have identified. It is steeped in the culture of Scotland. Being this close to Burns Night, it would be remiss to overlook our national bard, Rabbie Burns, who makes several mentions of Scots-pine, or Scots fir, as Jamie McGregor identified, as it was known then, in many of his poems and songs. The total area of Scots-pine in Scotland is around 130,000 hectares, as Angus-McDonald identified, or some 250 million individual trees. And they are home to some of our most iconic species, as others have said, such as pine martens, red squirrels, capercaillie, and indeed the wildcat, which was mentioned by others. It's a home to one of our unique birds, the Scottish crossbill, not found anywhere else in the world. And Scots pine is the key component of our Caledonian native pine woods, the remnants of which are all in the Scottish Highlands. The core area of this hugely important habitat is around 18,000 hectares, and we are actively working to see larger areas restored. And as Jamie McGregor stated, and I quote, there are many old granny pines, the name given to very old Scots pine across the country. So old, in fact, it's very difficult to tell the true age. And while I'm a gentleman, I would never ask a lady her age. Jamie McGregor identified one such tree in Glenloyne, which is almost 600 years old. And indeed, it's interesting to hear that there are older examples elsewhere in Europe. It's also one of our most important productive tree species, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Valued for its excellent timber qualities, and as members have said, it's used in many historic and modern buildings across Scotland. The designation of a national tree for Scotland will not only create a symbol, shining a spotlight on the great importance of Scotland's trees, but it can provide a stimulus for inspiration and innovation. The national tree is also a reminder that forestry is a great success story in Scotland, with a modern and vibrant industry contributing some £670 million per year to the economy and over 31,000 jobs. And to help promote the national tree, I can announce, I think it's picked up by a number of members, including Ms Ferguson, that I've asked the Forestry-Commission to make provision for a new grant to be created for innovative projects and events that raise the profile of Scots-pine, our new national tree. And this will include a separate fund for schools, and more detail will follow in due course on that. I think it's vitally important we get this into schools and get school children conversant in the idea of a national tree and what it stands for, because of the link to conservation. And Forestry-Commission Scotland will also explore links to new and ongoing initiatives such as a National Tree Day, National Tree Week and a Scots-pine Conference designed specifically to explore its place in Scotland's culture, our heritage and, of course, our economy. And the fate of the tree itself has very much an important bearing on these issues. As Joan McAlpin identified, we unfortunately do face some disease threats, and that's something the Government is actively taking forward. In 2014, the World Spotlight is in Scotland as we welcome the Commonwealth Games to Glasgow, global fans, golf fans to Gleneagles, and of course the people of Scotland have an opportunity to determine Scotland's future in September. But the Scots pine, with its rich colours, its ancient history, vibrant ecology and valuable timber, is a superb and fitting symbol for our country, and one we know plays a huge role in terms of tourism marketing and in marketing Scotland's environment more generally. So I'm pleased that the consultation and indeed the members here agree that the Scots pine is a worthy symbol to designate, and it will help highlight the significance of our trees, woods and forests here in Scotland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. I now close this meeting of Parliament.